Okay, so strap in for this deep dive. It's going to take us someplace we haven't really gone before. You know, the psychology of attraction. Well, we're looking at it in a totally new way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like imagine, a relationship expert just spilling the tea.
Yeah.
Just raw, unfiltered insights into how attraction actually works, like that initial spark, all the way to actually building something that lasts.
Right.
And that expert is Dennis Davydov.
And what's really interesting here is we're not trying to give you like a how-to guide or, step-by-step instructions. We're going deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's more about the actual dynamics going on under the surface.
About like getting a peek behind the curtain
Exactly.
of human interaction, and trust me, there's some pretty surprising things they're going to uncover.
Oh, for sure.
Like for instance, Davydov talks about these meta messages.
Oh, yeah.
These super subtle cues that can completely change the whole vibe of an interaction. And even how like ancient history somehow still plays a role in modern dating.
It's wild, right? I think what's important to keep in mind here is that we're getting into some pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with like everything Davydov says, there's a lot to learn from his perspective,
I'm with you on that. Okay, so let's start with something that may be a little controversial.
Okay.
Davydov spends a lot of time talking about what he calls fast seduction techniques.
Right.
So he's really breaking down this whole world of pickup artists and their methods. Have you ever come across those ideas before?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating area. What Davydov describes is these techniques that are like hyper-focused on speed, like quickly ramping up the attraction, and often through strategic manipulation.
Wow.
Yeah, and he lays out this whole framework of social spheres and behavioral models.
By what? What kind of models?
So he's got names like the botanist, the romantic, the alien, and these are basically like personas that these pickup artists use.
Oh, wow.
To kind of tailor their approach to different women.
It's like they're treating social interactions like a game.
Yeah, it's very strategic, very calculated.
Yeah, with set rules and strategies, but that's where things start to get a little bit, iffy.
For sure.
Like, are there some ethical concerns with this whole approach?
Absolutely. And to Davydov's credit, he does acknowledge the potential downsides of these techniques. He even warns readers to like really think about the long-term implications of relying on manipulation to build attraction. Because if you think about it, can you really have like a genuine connection?
Right.
If one person is constantly like trying to control the other person's behavior?
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder, like, where's the line?
Exactly.
Between genuine attraction and just straight up manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. Where is that line?
And Davydov really doesn't shy away from those gray areas.
Not at all.
Does he?
Nope. He dives right in. It gets really interesting.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to dive in.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
So he talks about this this power of nonverbal communication, what he calls meta messages, which are basically these like subtle cues that we send each other without even realizing it.
Okay, I got to admit, meta messages sounds a little bit academic.
Right.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. Think of it this way. You walk into a room, you see someone you're attracted to, right? Even before you say anything, you're already sending signals. A smile, a glance, the way you hold yourself.
Right.
Those are meta messages.
Okay.
They can say so much without us ever actually saying a word.
So it's like body language, tone of voice. Even the context can all contribute to these meta messages.
Exactly. And Davydov gives these really specific examples of how these messages can be used to communicate things like, I like you, or even, I want sex.
Wow.
And what's fascinating is that he points out that they can be used ethically and unethically.
So you're saying someone could be intentionally manipulating these meta messages.
Oh, absolutely.
To influence someone else's behavior that's kind of unsettling.
It is, which is why it's so important to be aware of these dynamics. Davydov talks about this interplay between rapport, which is about building that genuine connection, and behavioral modeling, which is essentially like mirroring someone's behavior to gain their trust. Both of those can be used for good or for not so good.
Wow. I'm starting to see how this all fits together. Davydov is really making us think about these subtle aspects of attraction that we maybe don't even realize are happening.
Exactly, and it goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
Because he doesn't just stop at the initial spark, he also dives into what it takes to build lasting attraction, like in long-term relationships.
Okay, that's where things get really interesting for me. I think we all want to know, like, what's the secret to keeping that spark alive?
Right. Well, according to Davidov, it's about maintaining a balance between physical intimacy and emotional connection.
Okay.
He talks about the potential pitfalls of what he calls the PZR, the post-sexual relationship.
The PZR.
Yeah, basically that phase when like the initial excitement kind of fades and couples start facing those challenges, like jealousy control issues or just taking each other for granted.
Ooh, the PZR. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that shift? In a
Yeah.
relationship where like the honeymoon phase is over
Oh, yeah.
and you got to like put in a little more work?
I think we've all been there
Yeah.
at some point. And Davidoff says it's crucial to navigate this phase very consciously.
Mm-hmm.
He really emphasizes trust and independence.
Okay.
Within a relationship, he even goes into some potentially controversial territory with advice on like sexual stamina and aphrodisiacs.
Yeah, some of those suggestions might raise a few eyebrows.
Right. But I think his underlying message is really about open communication and mutual respect, especially when it comes to physical intimacy.
Yeah, I see your point. It's about couples being able to openly talk about those potentially sensitive topics.
Yeah.
Without judgment.
Exactly. It's about creating a safe space for both partners to express their needs and desires.
Yeah, okay. This is where Davy Dog gets really thought-provoking. He brings up this analogy of a sexual marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds kind of harsh when you first hear it.
It does, yeah.
Like, are we talking about love or are we talking about economics here?
Right. It's not as transactional as it sounds, though.
Okay.
What he's actually doing is connecting this concept to evolutionary psychology and historical mating patterns.
Right.
He's arguing that even in like our modern world, those primal instincts, like dominance and resource acquisition, still play a role in shaping attraction.
So you're saying even with all of our social progress, we're still influenced by these ancient, almost animalistic drives?
To some extent, yeah. Davidov draws parallels between animal behavior and human mating strategies.
Wow.
He even goes so far as to say that women instinctively seek providers and men seek beauty.
Okay, before anyone jumps down our throats,
Right.
let's remember this is just one perspective.
Exactly.
And it definitely like sparks a conversation about how much of attraction is hardwired
Right.
versus shaped by our culture and experiences.
Yeah, that nature versus nurture debate.
Right, because that statement definitely oversimplifies the complexities of modern relationships and gender roles. But it does make you wonder,
It does.
doesn't it? Like how much of our behavior is truly conscious choice versus these like deep-seated instincts that we're not even aware of?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think Davidov's work, whether you agree with it or not, it forces us to confront those questions and examine our own beliefs about attraction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's get into the nitty-gritty of those initial encounters.
Okay.
Because that's where a lot of people struggle, right? Like,
Okay.
what does Davidov say about making a strong first impression?
Well, he's a big believer in confidence.
Okay.
He suggests that projecting confidence, even dominance, is key to capturing someone's attention.
Okay.
So think strong body language, maintaining eye contact, and even initiating physical contact early on.
Hey, hold on. That sounds a little aggressive.
Okay.
Like, are we saying people should just walk up and touch someone they've just met?
Oh, no, not at all. It's about being assertive in a respectful way. It's about conveying your interest and creating that sense of connection. And remember, Davidov is writing primarily for a male audience, so his advice tends to be geared towards men taking the initiative, but the underlying principle applies to anyone.
Huh?
Projecting confidence and showing genuine interest is universally attractive.
So it's not about being a pushy jerk.
Right.
It's about having the confidence to actually express your interest.
Exactly. And Davidov also talks about the importance of establishing what he calls a sexual context early on.
Okay, now, before we get the wrong idea,
Right.
this isn't about being inappropriate
No.
or disrespectful.
Not at all. It's more about shifting the energy of the interaction away from just casual chit-chat and towards something a little more flirtatious, a little more charged.
So instead of talking about the weather,
Right.
you're using more suggestive language, maybe some playful banter, a little light touch to kind of build some tension.
Exactly. It's about making it clear that you're interested in something more than just friendship. But doing it in a way that feels authentic and respectful to both people involved.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Right.
Confidence,
Right.
subtle cues, creating that charged atmosphere. It's all about building that initial spark.
Exactly. And once you've got that spark, it's about keeping the momentum going. Davidov really emphasizes the importance of leading the interaction.
Okay, what does he mean by leading? Does that mean like men should be calling all the shots?
Well, remember, he's writing from a specific perspective, but I
Wow.
think what he's getting at is that someone needs to take the initiative.
Okay.
It's about being decisive, suggesting activities, choosing venues, basically guiding the interaction in a way that feels purposeful and engaging.
Right.
Now, this doesn't have to be solely a male responsibility. It's about both people being active participants.
Mm-hmm.
But one person might naturally take on a more assertive role.
So it's less about gender roles and more about both people feeling like they're on the same page and enjoying the ride.
Exactly. And this is where things can get a little tricky because David Davydov also talks about this idea of qualifying a woman.
Qualifying? That sounds kind of harsh.
It does. A little bit like she's being judged or assessed.
Like a job interview or something.
Or it's not as cold-hearted as it sounds, though.
Okay.
I think what he's trying to say is that you should pay attention to her values,
Right.
her interests, her personality,
Right.
to see if she's someone you genuinely connect with.
Okay.
It's about compatibility beyond just physical attraction.
So it's not just about scoring points. It's about figuring out if this is someone you actually want to spend time with.
Exactly, and that takes effort from both sides. It's
Yeah.
about being authentic, being present, and seeing if there's a real spark there.
All right. We are starting to unpack some really fascinating stuff here.
We are.
It seems like Davidov's approach is all about understanding these nuances of attraction,
Mm-hmm.
both the conscious and the subconscious, and using that knowledge to create these meaningful connections.
Yeah, and we've got a lot more to uncover.
But I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface here.
Oh yeah, we've only just begun. Davidov has a lot more to say about navigating those early stages of attraction.
Okay.
There's this whole concept of kino-escalation. Kino-escalation.
Which basically means gradually increasing physical touch to build comfort and intimacy.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of isolation,
Isolation.
which is about creating a more private and intimate setting for connection.
Okay, this is getting juicy.
It is right.
It sounds like Davidov has a whole playbook for turning those initial sparks into something more.
He does.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's just take a moment to digest everything we've covered so far.
Okay.
We've talked about fast seduction, those tricky meta messages, even those primal forces at play in the sexual marketplace.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I think the key takeaway here is that attraction is this complex interplay of both instinct and conscious choice.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding those dynamics can empower us to create more authentic and fulfilling connections. It's absolutely well said. And for our listeners out there, I want you to think about your own experiences with attraction.
Right.
Have you ever noticed these subtle cues
Right.
or felt those primal instincts kicking in? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and make sure to stick around because when we come back, we're diving even deeper into Davydov's strategies for escalating attraction and building lasting intimacy.
This is going to be good. So we're back, and I'm excited to unpack some more of Davidov's ideas with you.
Yeah, me too.
Before the break, we were getting into some of the more strategic elements of attraction.
Mm.
And, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
Some of this might sound a little manipulative.
Right?
And it definitely raises some ethical questions.
Yeah, you're reading it feels a little strange to be like dissecting something as personal as attraction
Right.
in such a calculated way.
Right.
But I also think there's value in understanding these dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
even if we don't necessarily agree with every tactic.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right? And Davidov isn't advocating for using these techniques to deceive or exploit anyone.
Right.
He's simply offering a framework for understanding how attraction works. It's up to each individual to decide how they want to use that knowledge.
I like that perspective.
Yeah.
So before the break, we were talking about kino-escalation and isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Those sound like some pretty loaded terms.
They do.
Can you break those down for us a bit?
Sure. So kino-escalation is essentially about gradually increasing the intensity and intimacy of physical touch throughout the interaction.
Okay.
It's about building comfort and familiarity through touch.
So like starting with light touches on the arm or shoulder,
Right.
maybe progressing to holding hands and eventually leading to more intimate contact.
Exactly. It's about creating that sense of connection and intimacy through physical touch. Now, this doesn't mean you should just start groping someone.
And of course, consent is always key.
Absolutely. It's about reading the other person's cues and respecting their boundaries.
But I can see how gradually increasing physical touch could help build that sense of closeness and trust.
For sure. Now, isolation, on the other hand, is about separating the woman from her social group to create a more private and intimate setting.
So like suggesting a walk, or moving to a quieter part of the venue, or
Mm.
maybe even inviting her back to your place.
Precisely. It's about creating a space where you can connect on a deeper level without distractions. Now, again, this needs to be done with respect and sensitivity.
Of
You
course.
don't want to make the other person feel pressured or uncomfortable.
It sounds like Davidoff's approach is all about like creating the right conditions for attraction to flourish. But it's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
Between being assertive and being respectful, between creating a spark
Hmm.
and making sure everyone feels safe and comfortable.
It definitely is. And it's important to remember that not every technique is going to work for every person or every situation. It's
Yeah.
about finding what feels authentic to you and being adaptable.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about long-term relationships because I think that's where things get really challenging.
Right.
We've all heard the saying, relationships take work.
Right.
What does Davy Dov have to say about maintaining that spark over time?
Well, he stresses the importance of understanding the dynamics of what he calls the post-sexual relationship, or PZR.
Okay, remind me what that means again?
So it's that phase where the initial passion might subside and couples encounter new challenges. It's natural for the initial excitement to fade a bit,
Right.
and that's when couples really have to work to keep the spark alive.
I think we've all experienced that shift in a relationship, right, where the honeymoon phase is over
Yeah,
and you have to put in more conscious effort.
absolutely. And Davidov points out some potential pitfalls within the PZR, such as jealousy control issues and taking each other for granted.
Ooh, those are some tough hurdles.
Yeah.
How does he suggest couples navigate those challenges?
He's a big advocate for open communication. He believes that couples need to be able to talk about their needs and concerns honestly and without judgment.
That makes sense, but communication is easier said than done sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Especially when emotions are running high.
It's definitely a skill that takes practice. Davidov also stresses the importance of maintaining a sense of individuality within the relationship.
Huh.
He believes that couples should continue to pursue their own passions and interests, even as they build a life together.
I love that idea. It's about growing together while still maintaining your own sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about merging into one person,
Right.
but about complementing each other's strengths.
Exactly. He encourages couples to appreciate each other's strengths and support each other's personal growth. He even suggests that having individual passions can actually strengthen the bond between partners because you have more to share and talk about.
It keeps things interesting, but
Yeah.
let's be realistic. Relationships aren't always smooth sailing.
Right.
There are going to be conflicts and disagreements. How does Davy Dove suggest couples handle those bumps in the road?
He advocates for resolving conflicts constructively. That means listening to each other's perspectives, finding common ground, and working together to find solutions that benefit both partners.
So it's about teamwork,
Yes,
not about one person winning and the other losing.
exactly. And it's important to remember that even in the heat of an argument, you're still on the same team. You're both working towards a common goal, a happy and fulfilling relationship.
Okay, let's get a little spicy.
Yeah.
We've talked about communication, individuality, conflict resolution, but what about maintaining that physical spark?
That's definitely an important piece of the puzzle, and Davy Dove doesn't shy away from talking about sex.
Right.
He encourages couples to explore their desires, experiment, and keep things exciting in the bedroom.
He even gets into some rather unconventional advice on enhancing sexual stamina and incorporating aphrodisiacs, right?
He does, and while some of his suggestions might raise eyebrows, I think his underlying message is that couples should prioritize their sexual connection and actively seek ways to enhance their intimacy.
It's a reminder that physical intimacy is an important part of a healthy relationship and requires ongoing attention and effort, just like any other aspect of a partnership.
Absolutely. He encourages couples to approach this aspect of their relationship with open minds and a willingness to communicate their needs and desires. It's about being curious, playful, and adventurous together.
Now, Davidoff has this interesting concept called the sexual marketplace.
Right.
It's a bit of a jarring term, but can you explain what he means by that?
It might seem a little transactional at first glance, but it's really just an analogy to illustrate how attraction and mate selection are influenced by certain factors that operate within a social context.
So it's about understanding the unwritten rules of the game, so to speak.
Precisely, he argues that both men and women bring certain assets to the table, such as physical attractiveness, social status resources, and personality traits. These factors influence their perceived value within the marketplace and impact their choices when seeking a partner.
So it's not about putting a price tag on people, but about recognizing that we all have certain qualities that make us attractive to others, and those qualities can play a role in who we choose to partner with.
Exactly. And it's important to note that this marketplace isn't static. It's constantly evolving based on societal norms and individual preferences. What might have been considered a valuable asset in the past might not be as important today.
Right, like in the past, physical strength might have been a top priority, but today maybe intelligence and emotional intelligence are valued more.
Exactly. Davyanov even draws parallels between animal behavior and human mating strategies, connecting this concept to evolutionary psychology.
So he's saying that even in our modern world, we're still influenced by those ancient drives to
Yeah.
seek out partners who will help us survive and thrive.
To some extent, yes. He suggests that women are often instinctively drawn to men who display strength, leadership, and the ability to provide, while men tend to be attracted to women who exhibit beauty, youthfulness, and nurturing qualities.
Okay, I can see how that might ruffle some feathers. It sounds like he's reinforcing traditional gender roles, which might not resonate with everyone.
You're right, and it's important to acknowledge that Davidoff clarifies that these tendencies are not absolute and are often influenced by cultural and societal factors. He acknowledges that modern relationships are more complex and diverse than these simplistic generalizations.
So it's not as simple as saying all women want a provider and all men want a trophy wife. It's about recognizing that there are these deep-seated instincts at play, but they're not the only factors that determine attraction.
Exactly, and I think it's fascinating to consider how those instincts might manifest in our modern world, for example. Maybe a woman's attraction to a man with resources translates into being drawn to someone with ambition and drives someone who's passionate about their work.
And maybe a man's attraction to a woman's youthfulness and beauty translates into being drawn to someone who takes care of themselves and has a vibrant energy, not necessarily someone who's actually young.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface level and considering the deeper psychological and emotional factors at play.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground here, from those potentially manipulative tactics to navigating the complexities of long-term relationships. And I think it's important to acknowledge that not everyone is going to agree with everything Davidoff says.
Yeah.
Some of his ideas might feel outdated or even offensive to some people. But I do think there's value in exploring these different perspectives and having these conversations.
I completely agree whether we embrace his ideas or challenge them. I think Davidov's work forces us to think critically about the dynamics of attraction and the choices we make in our relationships.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll delve into some of the more controversial aspects of Davidoff's work, including his ideas about triggers and the darker side of seduction. Stay tuned. All right, we're back. And my brain is still buzzing from everything we've talked about so far.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It really is. We've gone from confidence and body language to ancient instincts still playing a role in modern dating. But I think we're about to go even deeper.
I think you're right. Dizidov doesn't shy away from the more controversial aspects of attraction and seduction.
Yeah, this is where I get a little nervous.
Okay.
We've already talked about how some of his techniques could be seen as manipulative.
Yeah.
But what about the ethics of all of this?
Well, one of the most controversial parts of his work is this idea that there are these almost universal triggers or buttons.
Unders.
Yeah, particularly for women. He argues that certain traits or behaviors in men can evoke a very strong, almost automatic response in women, even if they're not consciously aware of it.
Okay, hold on. Triggers. That sounds a little bit alarming. Are we talking about exploiting vulnerabilities here?
It's not quite that sinister. His approach is really rooted in evolutionary psychology.
Okay.
He suggests that these triggers are like remnants of our ancestral past, things that would have signaled strength, resourcefulness, or desirability in a potential mate. And he believes that these ancient instincts still influence how we perceive attractiveness today, even if we're not fully aware of it.
So even in our modern world, with all its social progress and technology, we're still running on Stone Age software.
That's the idea. And while it might sound a little deterministic, I think there's something to be said for understanding these deep-seated drives. It's not about excusing bad behavior,
Right.
but about recognizing that we're all influenced by forces that we might not fully understand.
Okay, I'm willing to keep an open mind. So what kind of triggers are we talking about here?
He points to things like a man's social status and confidence.
Oh.
He believes that women are still drawn to men who exude an air of authority and self-assurance. Even if it's on a subconscious level, think of it like that leader of the pack instinct.
Right, so even if a woman isn't consciously thinking, I need a man who can dominate others,
Right.
she might still find herself drawn to someone who projects that kind of energy.
Exactly. It's about those subtle cues and signals that we pick up on without even realizing it.
Yep.
He also mentions a man's ability to provide resources now in today's world. That doesn't necessarily mean bringing home a slain mammoth,
Right, of course.
but it could translate into financial stability, career success, those indicators that a man can take care of himself and potentially a family.
I can see how that might be interpreted as materialistic,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but on a deeper level, it's about security and stability, right? Those are pretty fundamental human needs.
That's a good point. It's about feeling safe and secure knowing that you and your potential offspring will be taken care of. It's about having a partner who can weather the storms of life.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these triggers might play out in a more nuanced way than I initially thought.
Mm.
What else does he mention?
Well, he also talks about physical strength and athleticism.
Okay.
Again, it's about those primal signals of health and virility.
So even in our modern world of desk jobs and Netflix binges, those six-pack abs still have a certain allure.
Davidoff would argue that they do, but it's not just about aesthetics. It's about those subconscious signals of good genes and physical prowess.
Interesting, he also mentions humor as a trigger.
Right.
That one seems a little less primal. I mean, who doesn't love a good laugh?
You're right. Humor is universally appealing. But Davidoff suggests that it can signal intelligence, creativity, and social intelligence, all of which would have been valuable traits in our evolutionary past. It's also about creating a sense of connection and shared enjoyment, which are essential for building a strong bond.
Laughter is definitely a powerful connector. So if I'm understanding this correctly, Davidov is suggesting that while these triggers are rooted in our ancient past, they still hold some weight in our modern world.
That's his argument. He believes that understanding these triggers can help men understand what women find attractive, even if those women aren't fully aware of those influences themselves. It's about recognizing the subconscious forces at play.
Okay, but this is where I get a little uneasy. Doesn't this approach risk reducing attraction to a set of manipulative tactics? Like if I just display these specific traits, I can make any woman fall for me.
That's a valid concern, and it's important to approach these ideas with caution. Davidov himself emphasizes that authenticity is key. It's not about trying to fake these traits or manipulate someone into feeling something they don't. It's about understanding what women find attractive and using that knowledge to develop your own authentic strengths.
So it's about self-improvement, not about trying to trick or manipulate anyone.
Exactly. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, both for your own sake and to increase your attractiveness to potential partners.
This whole deep dive has really challenged my assumptions about attraction and relationships. It's made me think about how much of our behavior is driven by those deep-seated instincts versus our conscious choices.
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? And I think Davidov would argue that it's not an either-or proposition. It's more likely a complex interplay of both. We're influenced by our evolutionary past, but we also have the capacity for reason, self-awareness, and ethical decision-making.
It's like we have this primal operating system running in the background, but we could choose to write our own code, so to speak.
That's a great analogy, and I think that's ultimately what Davidov is encouraging us to do, to understand the forces at play, but to also make conscious and deliberate choices in our relationships, choices that align with our values and contribute to our own well-being and the well-being of others.
So after all this unpacking and analyzing, what's the takeaway for our listeners? What's the so what of all this knowledge?
I think it boils down to this: self-awareness is paramount. Understanding those deep-seated instincts, those triggers that Davidov talks about, can help us make more informed choices in our relationships. We can choose to play into those instincts, or we can choose to act in ways that are more aligned with our conscious values.
It's about taking responsibility for our choices, rather than letting those primal drives run the show.
Exactly. And I think it's also about recognizing the complexity of attraction. It's not just about physical appearance or mastering some secret technique. It's about being the best version of yourself, cultivating your strengths, and approaching relationships with authenticity and respect.
Well said. I have to admit, this deep dive into Dennis Davidov's world has been a real eye-opener. It's challenged my thinking, made me question some assumptions, and give me a whole new perspective on this fascinating and often baffling world of attraction and relationships.
I agree. It's been a journey of discovery, and I hope our listeners have found it just as thought-provoking and insightful.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but there's always more to explore. The world of attraction and relationships is vast and endlessly fascinating. We've only scratched the surface here today.
And we'll continue to delve into these topics, bringing you new insights and perspectives to help you navigate this intricate terrain.
But for now, we want to hear from you what resonated with you from this deep dive. What questions are you left with? Share your reflections in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes.
And remember, whether you agree with Davydov or not, his work offers a unique lens for understanding the dynamics of attraction. It's up to each of us to decide how we want to apply those insights to our own lives and relationships.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of attraction. Until next time.